All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at a staggering, totally unprecedented nuclear concession from Iran that has somehow gotten almost entirely lost in the noise of daily war coverage. I mean, we are looking at what might actually be the foundation for nuclear peace, emerging right smack in the middle of a deeply destructive conflict. It's a massive development, and it definitely demands our full attention.
Now, the source of this breakthrough is what makes it truly fascinating. These aren't just rumors floating around the internet. This was confirmed directly by Oman's top diplomat, Badr bin Hamad al-Busaidi. And why does his word matter so much? Well, he's been the key mediator for U.S.-Iran diplomatic relations since 2013, and he actually just brokered the third round of indirect talks in Geneva. So when he comes out and states unequivocally that Iran agreed never to stockpile enriched uranium and never to create a bomb, we're talking about a seismic shift in global diplomacy.
But you gotta ask yourself, with a concession this huge, which is literally the holy grail of nuclear negotiations for the West, why isn't the whole world just cheering in the streets right now? Well, that brings us face to face with the incredibly complicated, often totally contradictory reality of wartime diplomacy. The fact that people aren't celebrating doesn't mean the breakthrough is fake. It just shows us how agonizingly difficult the path from a single diplomatic concession to a signed agreement actually is.
Section 1. The core nuclear question.
To truly grasp the weight of this concession, and to understand the fundamental dispute that completely collapsed the previous talks in Islamabad back on April 12th, we really have to look at the two simultaneous threats America has been trying to stop. First, you have the physical enrichment program, the actual centrifuges spinning, processing the uranium to increasingly high concentrations. And second, there's the breakout time. This is the technical timeline. Think of it like a ticking clock, measuring exactly how fast Iran could theoretically convert that enriched stockpile into a functional nuclear weapon if they suddenly decided to do so.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that America didn't just want a temporary pause on those spinning centrifuges. Throughout this whole conflict, the core U.S. demand was that Iran provide permanent, verifiable guarantees that its program would never, ever produce a weapon. But for Iran, historically, that was an absolute non-starter. They viewed any permanent demands from the West not as diplomacy, but as a total surrender of their national sovereignty. And that right there was the ultimate stalemate.
But, according to Oman's foreign minister, we now have a completely new commitment on the table. We're talking about an unequivocal, never-ever agreement to not possess nuclear material capable of creating a bomb. This is a red line Iran had literally never crossed before. It's a really stark contrast to the famous 2015 JCPOA agreement, which, if you recall, only placed temporary limits, monitoring mechanisms, and caps on their stockpiles. It wasn't an absolute, permanent ban like this is.
Section 2. The cost of war. So why now? To understand exactly why Iran finally crossed this historic red line, we have to look past the negotiation table and examine the immense, really suffocating pressure of the current physical and economic reality on the ground. We are 81 grueling days into a war that has fundamentally altered the landscape of this entire negotiation. You simply cannot separate the diplomacy happening in Geneva from the brutal reality of the battlefield.
$500 million. That is the devastating daily cost of the current economic blockade on Iran. It is completely depleting their foreign reserves. The economic strain is so incredibly severe right now that it even prompted the Iranian parliament speaker to deliver what was described as a desperate frugality missile speech. They just cannot sustain this economic trajectory indefinitely.
Now combine that massive economic devastation with this tragic human toll, 3,468 Iranian dead. Faced with this dual reality, the regime appears to have concluded that offering a substantive, unprecedented nuclear concession was pretty much their only viable path forward. It basically became a harsh calculation: offer a never-ever commitment on bomb material to preserve the regime, or face total economic collapse and resumed bombing.
Section 3. The 14-point proposal.
But as we know, the gap between making a single diplomatic concession and getting a signed agreement is massive. We see this super clearly when we look at Tehran's revised proposal submitted to end hostilities in mid-May 2026. Because Iran didn't just hand over the nuclear concession in a vacuum. No, they attached it to a broader 14-point proposal. And it's filled with demands that America has flatly called unacceptable. Things like heavy demands for financial reparations, sweeping U.S. military force withdrawals from the entire region, and formal recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the highly contested Strait of Hormuz.
However, despite those highly contested and completely unacceptable broader terms, negotiators managed to do something really vital. They extracted that one specific, golden nuclear concession from the broader framework. They've essentially isolated it and identified it as a foundational, single building block around which an actual, lasting peace deal might eventually be constructed.
Section 4. Building blocks of peace.
Now, if you're sitting there thinking, well, a single building block isn't enough to stop a war, history actually shows us that this is exactly how high-stakes diplomacy works. Comprehensive deals are almost never these grand, simultaneous bargains where everyone just smiles and shakes hands on day one. From the JCPOA to the historic US-Soviet START treaties, it takes years of outward building. You start by identifying just one or two foundational commitments in private, usually deeply contested starting points. Then you move to interim freeze agreements, and only years later do you finalize the grand treaties.
So if this never-ever concession proves to be genuine and verifiable, the ultimate trade-off becomes crystal clear. On one side, America secures the absolute, permanent security guarantee it essentially went to war for. And on the flip side, Iran secures massive sanctions relief, the release of frozen assets, and ultimately, the economic survival its government so desperately needs to stay afloat.
But, okay, let's aggressively ground ourselves in reality for a second here. The deal is definitely not done. That 14-point proposal has not been accepted. The mines in the Strait of Hormuz are not cleared, meaning ships still aren't moving freely. The ceasefire is incredibly fragile, Iranian proxies are still striking, and honestly, a nuclear power plant in Abu Dhabi was even struck by drones recently. The environment remains incredibly hostile and dangerous.
Oman's foreign minister said these exact optimistic words that a peace deal is within reach on Friday, February 28th. That was the day before the war started. And now he's saying them again. But 81 days of bloodshed, billions in economic damage, and thousands of lives lost have completely transformed the context of that diplomacy. The words might be the exact same, but the world around them has changed entirely.
So the nuclear concession is real, and as Oman insists, a deal isn't just some fantasy. It's a specific outcome that all this painful, non-linear engagement has been moving toward. But it leaves us with one haunting question regarding the absolute scarcest commodity in the world right now: trust. Can enemies who have spent the last 81 days absolutely devastating each other actually find enough trust to build a lasting peace on this single, unprecedented promise? That is the big takeaway from our explainer today, and it is the pivotal question we'll all be watching closely as this historic situation unfolds.